The Hiding Place. Chapter 7. Eusie. Peter was home, yet he was not safe, any more than any healthy young male was safe. In Germany, the munitions factories were desperate for workers. Without warning, soldiers would suddenly surround a block of buildings and sweep through them, herding every male between 16 and 30 into trucks for transport. This method of lightning search and seizure was called the razia, and every family with young men lived in dread of it. Flip and Noli rearranged their kitchen to give them an emergency hiding place as soon as the razzias started. There was a small potato cellar beneath the kitchen floor. They enlarged the trapdoor letting into it, put a large rug on top of it, and moved the kitchen table to stand on the spot. Since Mr. Smith's work at the beach, I realized that this hole under the kitchen floor was an inadequate hiding place and probably, as Mr. Smith would say, the first place they'd look. However, it was planned not for a sustained search by trained officials, but a swoop by soldiers, a place to get out of sight for half an hour. For that, it was probably sufficient. It was Flip's birthday when the razzia came to that quiet residential street. Father, Betsy, and I had come early. Noli, Annalise, and the two older girls were out when we arrived. We were chatting in the kitchen with Corrie and Katrine when all at once Peter and his older brother, Bob, raced into the room, their faces white. Soldiers. They're 2 doors down and coming this way. They jerked the table back, snatched away the rug, and tugged open the trapdoor. Bob lowered himself first, lying down flat, and Peter tumbled in on top of him. We dropped the door shut, yanked the rug over it, and pulled the table back in place. With trembling hands, Betsy, Corrie, and I threw a long tablecloth over it and started laying 5 places for tea. There was a crash in the hall as the front door burst open and a smaller crash as Corrie dropped a teacup. 2 uniformed Germans ran into the kitchen, rifles leveled. "Stay where you are." We heard boots storming up the stairs. The soldiers glanced around at this room filled with women and one old man. "Where are your men?" the shorter soldier asked Corrie. "These are my aunts," she said, "and this is my grandfather. My father is at his school, and my mother is shopping, and—" I didn't ask about the whole tribe, the man exploded in German. Then in Dutch, "Where are your brothers?" Corrie stared at him a second. My heart stood still. I knew how Noli had trained her children, but surely now of all times a lie was permissible. "Do you have brothers?" the officer asked again. "Yes," Corrie said softly. 3. "How old are they?" 21, 19, and 18. Upstairs, we heard the sounds of doors opening and shutting, the scrape of furniture dragged from walls. "Where are they now?" the soldier persisted. Corrie leaned down and began gathering up the broken bits of cup. The man jerked her upright. "Where are your brothers?" "The oldest one is at the theological college." "What about the other 2? Corrie did not miss a breath. "They're under the table." Motioning us all away with his gun, the soldier seized a corner of the tablecloth and flung it back. Suddenly Corrie burst into spasms of hysterical laughter. The soldiers whirled around. Was she laughing at them? "Don't take us for fools," the short one snarled. Furiously, he strode from the room, and minutes later the entire squad trooped out. It was a strange dinner party that evening, veering as it did from heartfelt thanksgiving to the nearest thing to a bitter argument our close-knit family ever had. Noli stuck by Corrie, insisting she would have answered the same way. God honors truth-telling with perfect protection. Peter and Bob, from the viewpoint of the trapdoor, were not so sure. And neither was I. I had never had Noli's bravery, nor her faith, but I could spot a logic. It isn't logical to say the truth and DOA lie. What about Annalise's false papers and that maid's uniform on Katrine? "Set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth," Noli quoted. "Keep the door of my lips." Psalm 141. All right, what about the radio? I had to lie with my lips to keep that. "Whatever came from your lips, Corrie, I am sure it was spoken in love." Father's kindly voice reproached my flushed face. Love. How did one show it? How could God himself show truth and love at the same time in a world like this? By dying. The answer stood out for me sharper and chillier than it ever had before that night, the shape of a cross etched on the history of the world. By early 1943, it was getting harder to find safe homes in the country for the scores of Jews who were passing through our underground station. Even with ration cards and forged papers, there were not enough places for them all. Sooner or later, we knew we were going to have to start hiding people in the city. That year, winter came cold and early and stayed late. Fuel was scarce. In parks and along the canals, trees began to disappear as people cut them down to burn for heat. One morning, Christophels did not show for work, and his landlady found him dead in his bed. We buried the old clockmaker in the splendid suit and vest he had worn to the 100th birthday party 6 years and another lifetime ago. Spring came slowly. I celebrated my 51st birthday. A couple of weeks after, we were helped with a reunion of a married Jewish couple by the red-haired policeman named Rolf. We were surprised and grateful for his help, and that night we held a meeting about him, Betsy and I and the dozen or so teenage boys and girls who acted as messengers for this work. If Rolf had risked his own safety to help us, perhaps he should work with us. Lord Jesus, I said aloud, this could be a danger for all of us and for Rolf, too. But even with the words came a flood of assurance about this man. How long, I wondered, would we be led by this gift of knowledge? I assigned one of our younger boys to follow Rolf home from work the next day and learn where he lived. The older boys, those susceptible to the factory draft, we sent out only after dark now and most often dressed as girls. The following week I visited Rolf at home. You have no idea how much your help meant to us, I said when I was inside. How can we repay this kindness? Rolf ran his hands through his bright hair. Well, there is a way. The cleaning woman at the jail has a teenage son, and they've almost picked him up twice. She's desperate to find another place for him to live. Perhaps I can help, I said. Do you think she could find that her watch needs repairing? The next day, Toots came to me. There's a funny-looking little woman downstairs, Toots said. Her name is Meech. She says to tell you Rolf sent her. I met Meech in the dining room. The hand that I shook was ridged and leathery from years of scrubbing floors. I understand, I said, that you have a son you're very proud of. Oh, yes. Meech's face lit up at the mention of him. I took the alarm clock she had brought with her. Come for your clock tomorrow afternoon, and I'll hope to have good news. That night we learned there was a place available on a nearby tulip farm, but the farmer had decided he must be paid for the risk he was taking. We would have to provide a fee plus an additional ration card. It did not happen often that a host would require money for his services. When one did, we paid gladly. When Meech appeared the following morning, I took a small banknote from my purse and tore off a corner. This is for your son, I said. Tonight he is to go to the Gravenstenbrug. There is a tree stump next to the bridge. He is to wait beside it, looking into the canal. A man will come up and ask if he has change for a bank bill. Your son is to match the missing corner and then follow this man without asking questions. Meech grasped my hand in her 2 sandpaper ones. Someday, I'll find a way to repay you. I smiled. How could this simple soul help with the kind of need we faced? So the work grew. As each new need arose, a new answer was found, too. Through Pickwick, for example, we met the man at the Central Telephone Exchange whose department handled orders to connect and disconnect lines. With a little rewiring and juggling of numbers, he soon had our instrument in operation. What a day it was when the old wall phone in the rear hall jangled for the first time in 3 years. And how we needed it. By now there were 80 Dutchmen, elderly women and middle-aged men, along with our teenagers, working in God's underground, as we sometimes laughingly called ourselves. Most of these people never saw one another. We kept face-to-face contacts as few as possible. But all knew the beach. It was headquarters, the center of a spreading web. But the telephone was also a fresh risk. We set the phone's ring as low as we could and still hear it, but who might be passing through the hall when it rang? For that matter, how long would curious eyes up and down the street continue to believe that one small watch shop was quite as busy as it appeared? It was true that repair work was in demand. Plenty of legitimate customers passed in and out. But there was too much coming and going, especially in the early evening, and curfew was now 7 p.m. We could never be sure our line was not tapped. So we developed a system for coding our underground messages in terms of watches. We have a woman's watch here that needs repairing. But I can't find a mainspring. Do you know who might have one? We have a Jewish woman in need of a hiding place, and we cannot find one among our regular contacts. I have a watch here with a face that's causing difficulty. One of the numbers has worked loose, and it's holding back the hand. Do you know anyone who does this kind of repair work? We have a Jew here whose features are especially Semitic. Do you know anyone who would be willing to take an extra risk? I'm sorry, but the watch you left with us is not reparable. Do you have the receipt? A Jew has died in one of our houses. We need a burial permit. One morning in the middle of June, the telephone rang with this message. We have a man's watch here that's giving us trouble. We can't find anyone to repair it. For one thing, the face is very old-fashioned. So, a Jew whose features gave him away. This was the hardest kind of person to place. Send the watch over and I'll see what we can do in our own shop, I said. Promptly at 7 o'clock that evening the side doorbell rang. I glanced at the mirror in the window of the dining room where we were still sitting. Even from the side of his head I could tell that this was our old-fashioned watch. I ran down to the door. Do come in. The smiling man in his early 30s, with a balding head and minuscule glasses, gave an elaborate bow. I liked him instantly. Once the door was closed, he took out a pipe. The very first thing I must ask, he said, is whether or not I should leave behind my good friend the pipe. Meyer Mossel and his pipe are not easily separated. But for you, kind lady, I would gladly say goodbye to my friend. I left. Of all who had come to our house, this was the first to enter cheerfully and with a question about our comfort. Keep your pipe, I said. I took him up to the dining room. There were 7 seated at the table, a Jewish couple waiting placement, and 3 underground workers in addition to Father and Betsy. Meyer Mossel's eyes went straight to Father. But, he cried, one of the patriarchs. It was exactly the right thing to say to Father. But, he returned with equal good humor, a brother of the chosen people. Can you recite the 166th Psalm, Opa? Meyer said. Father beamed. Of course there is no Psalm 166, the Psalter stops with 150. It must be a joke, and nothing could please Father better than a scriptural joke. Shall I recite it for you? Meyer asked. Father gave a bow of assent and Meyer plunged into verse. But that's Psalm 100. Father interrupted. Then his face lit up. Of course. Psalm 66 started with the identical words. Meyer had asked for the 100th and the 66th Psalm. For the rest of the evening I could hear Father chuckling, Psalm 166. At 8:45 Father took the Bible from its shelf. He opened to the reading in Jeremiah where we had left off the night before, then passed the Bible across the table to Meyer. I would consider it an honor if you would read tonight, Father said. Lifting the book lovingly, Meyer rose to his feet. From a pocket came a small prayer cap, and then, from deep in his throat, half-sung, half-pleaded, came the words of the ancient prophet. We would learn he had been cantor in the synagogue in Amsterdam. For all his lightheartedness, he had suffered much. Most of his family had been arrested. His wife and children were in hiding on a farm that had declined to accept Meyer, for obvious reasons, he said with a grimace. Gradually it dawned on us that this endearing man was at the beach to stay. It was certainly not an ideal place, but for Meyer nothing could be ideal right now. At least, I told him one evening as we sat with Kik and others around the table, your name doesn't have to give you away, too. I think we'll call you Eusebius. Meyer leaned back and took his pipe out of his mouth. Eusebius Mossel, he said. It doesn't sound quite right. We all laughed. Kik looked slyly at Father. Opa, how about Smit? That seems a popular name these days. It does seem so, said Father, not catching the joke. And Eusebius Smit he became, affectionately called Eusie. Within a week there were 3 new permanent additions to the household. First there was Job, our current apprentice, whose daily trip from his parents' home in the suburbs had twice nearly ended in seizure for the factory transport. The second time it happened, his parents asked if he could stay at the beach, and we agreed. The other two were Hank, a young lawyer, and Lendert, a school teacher. Lendert made an especially important contribution to the secret life of the beach. He installed our electric warning system. By now I had learned to make the nighttime trip out to Pickwick's almost as skillfully as could kick. One evening, when I had gratefully accepted a cup of coffee, my friend sat me down for a lecture. "Cornelia," he said, "I understand you have no alarm system in your house. This is purest folly. Also, I am given to believe that you are not carrying on regular drills for your guests." I was always amazed at how well Pickwick knew what went on at the beach. "A raid may come any day," Pickwick continued. "I don't see how you can avoid one. Scores of people in and out, and an NSB agent living up the street. Your secret room is no good to you if people can't get to it in time. I know this Lendert. He's a very passable electrician. Get him to put a buzzer in every room with a door or a window on the street. Then hold practice drills until your people can disappear in that room without a trace in less than a minute." Lendert did the electrical work that weekend. He installed a buzzer near the top of the stairs, loud enough to be heard all over the house, but not outside. Then he placed buttons to sound the buzzer at every vantage point where trouble might first be spotted. One button went beneath the dining room windowsill. Another went in the downstairs hall just inside that door, and a third inside the front door. He also put a button behind the counter in the shop and one in each workbench, as well as beneath the windows in Tantyan's rooms. We were ready for our first trial run. The 4 unacknowledged members of our household were already climbing up to the secret room 2 times a day, in the morning to store their night clothes, bedding, and toilet articles, and in the evening to put away their day things. Members of our group who had to spend the night also kept raincoats, hats, anything they had brought with them in that room. That made a good deal of traffic in and out of my small bedroom, smaller now by nearly a yard. Many nights my last waking sight would be Eusie in robe and tasseled nightcap, handing his day clothes through the secret panel. But the purpose of the drills was to see how rapidly people could reach the room at any hour of the day or night without prior notice. A tall young man arrived from Pickwick one morning to teach me how to conduct the drills. "Smith," Father exclaimed when the man introduced himself. "Truly, it's most astonishing. We've had one Smith after another here lately." Mr. Smith disentangled himself gently from Father's inquiries and followed me upstairs. "Mealtimes," he said. "That's a favorite hour for a raid. Also the middle of the night." He strode from room to room, pointing to evidence that more than 3 people lived in the house. He paused in a bedroom door. "If the raid comes at night, they must not only take their sheets and blankets, but get the mattress turned. That's the SD's favorite trick, feeling for a warm spot on a bed." Mr. Smith stayed for lunch. There were 11 of us at the table that day, including a Jewish lady who had arrived the night before and a Gentile woman and her small daughter, members of our underground, who acted as escorts. The 3 of them were leaving for a farm right after lunch. Betsy had just passed around a stew so artfully prepared you scarcely missed the meat when, without warning, Mr. Smith leaned back in his chair and pushed the button below the window. Above us the buzzer sounded. People sprang to their feet, snatching up glasses and plates, scrambling for the stairs. Cries of "faster," "not so loud," and "you're spilling it" reached us as Father, Betsy, and I hastily rearranged table and chairs to look like a lunch for 3 in progress. "No, leave my place," Mr. Smith instructed. "Why shouldn't you have a guest for lunch?" The lady and the little girl could have stayed, too. At last we were seated again and silence reigned upstairs. The whole process had taken 4 minutes. Later we gathered again around the dining room table. Mr. Smith set out before him the incriminating evidence he had found: 2 spoons and a piece of carrot on the stairs, pipe ashes in an unoccupied bedroom. The next night I sounded the alarm again, and this time we shaved 1 minute and 33 seconds off our run. By our 5th trial we were down to 2 minutes. We never did achieve Pickwick's ideal of under a minute, but with practice we learned to jump up from whatever we were doing and get those who had to hide into the secret room in 70 seconds. Father, Toots and I worked on stalling techniques, which we would use if the Gestapo came through the shop door. Betsy invented a similar strategy for the side door. With those delaying tactics, we hoped we could gain life-saving seconds. Soon we had 3 more permanent boarders arrive: Thea DaCosta, Meta Monsanto, and Mary Italy. The moment Mary stepped through our door, I heard the asthmatic wheezing that had made other hosts unwilling to take her in. Since her ailment compromised the safety of the others, we gathered in Tante Jan's front room. Eusie, Jop, Henk, Lendert, Meta, Thea, and Mary herself joined Father, Betsy, and me. "There is no sense in pretending," I began. "Mary has a difficulty that could put you all in danger." In the silence that followed, Mary's labored breathing seemed especially loud. Eusie spoke first. "It seems to me that we're all here in your house because we're the ones nobody else wanted. Any one of us is jeopardizing the others. I vote that Mary stay." "Good," said Lawyer Henk. "Let's put it to the vote." Hands began rising, but Mary struggled to speak. "Secret ballots," she said at last. "No one should be embarrassed." Henk tore a sheet of paper into 9 strips. "You too," he said, handing ballots to Betsy, Father, and me. "If we're discovered, you suffer too." He handed around pencils. "Mark no if it's too great a risk, yes if you think she belongs here." For a moment pencils scratched, and then Henk collected the folded ballots. He opened them in silence, then reached over and dropped them into Mary's lap. 9 scraps of paper, 9 times the word yes. So our family was formed. Others stayed with us a day or a week, but these 7 remained, the nucleus of our happy household. That it could have been happy, at such a time and in such circumstances, was largely a tribute to Betsy. Because our guests' lives were so restricted, evenings under Betsy's direction became the door to the wide world. Sometimes we had concerts, with Lendert on the violin and Thea on the piano. Or Betsy would announce a title of a play with each of us reading a part. One night a week she talked Eusie into giving Hebrew lessons, another night Meta taught Italian. The city now had electricity only a brief time each night, and candles were hoarded for emergencies. When the lamps dimmed, we would go back down to the dining room, where my bicycle was set up on its stand. While the others took chairs, one of us would climb onto the bicycle and pedal furiously to make the headlight glow. Then a reader would pick up the chapter from the night before. We changed cyclist and reader as often as legs or voice grew tired, working our way through histories, novels, plays. Father always went upstairs after prayers at 9:15. But the rest of us lingered, reluctant to break the circle, sorry to see the evening end.